Welcome to Standard Theory. In the previous segments we discussed some special scales of communication including the V scale and the D scale. In this segment we will revisit the study of STEM psychology which correlates the scale of impulse to the scale of intelligence. The study of STEM psychology allows the trends of communication between the R and Z scale to be observed and studied. These phenomena can be thought of as personality types. The types of personalities recognized by the standard theory of psychology are loosely based on the amount of baseline complexity used in each respective type. Previously, the capacity of impulse in any given cycle of communication was identified at 4.5 cycles. Each of these levels of impulse can be accompanied by some amount of complex information. For that reason, standard theory identifies 4+1 main personality types. The first type relies on zero complexity in the processing of intelligent information. This personality is referred to as a positive personality. In positive personality, the trend of communication of intelligence is expected to proceed from a low-energy processing to a high-energy processing with the expectation of the individual that communication will tend to become more constructive. In positive personality, the expenditure of additional energy is the preference in order to complete the transmission of information or in order to complete reciprocable cycles of communications with others across varying types of thinking and communication. The tendency is for this type of communication to become more constructive, and time goes on with the tendency for communication to build up to the overload event experienced in intimate communication. The second personality type is based on a baseline of 1 complexity. This type of communication is not necessarily destructive in nature but will likely tend to result in some amount of destructive cycle of communication by way of avoiding transmission of complete cycles of communication in favor of communicating some amount of complexity related to each cycle. This type of personality is referred to as negative personality, and the tendency is for the communication to become less constructive over time. Those with negative personalities expect that communication will fail based on the complexity associated with the negative personality. This in itself does not mean that a person with negative personality cannot maintain relationships or complete communication. Instead, the nature of relationship and communication of constructive cycles are reliant on the need for the baseline complexity related to the negative personality to be communicated to the other party as a way to complete a meaningful cycle of communication. In negative personality, the communication can be considered unresolved or pending until that complexity can be understood by the other party in communication. For that reason, some of the relationships maintained by those with negative personalities can become related to the shared experience that complexity or the recognition of the chaos and unknown that serves as the baseline for the capacity of communication, since the negative personality type is based on some amount of irregular or unknown processing. This tends to begin at maximum intelligent activation and decrease from there, with the meaning of that communication more heavily dependent on the deactivation or lack of overload rather than the build-up to overload. The third personality type is considered to be a dissociative personality. In this type of processing, there are 2 complexities. The first complexity is not necessarily a baseline factor. Instead, the complexity in a dissociative personality is associated with any prompt for communication. From there, the complexity becomes related to the type of thinking related to that prompt for communication. Functionally, the first complexity becomes the related to the thinking type, though to be appropriate for the prompt for communication. For this reason, the first complexity of the dissociative personality correlates to the lack of a discernible identity at some level of communication, namely silent or self-identity. From there, the second complexity is correlated to the trend of communication, whether destructive or constructive. This allows for the experience of a positively dissociative personality as well as a negatively dissociative personality. The trend at that point follows the patterning of positive or negative personality. The expectation at that point is to form or recognize a discernible identity between the parties of communication based on the positive or negative trend. That is, the expectation that the communication will lead to overload or will not lead to overload. The complexity of expected thinking type as well as the complexity for the experience of either positive or negative identity are the main features of the dissociative personality type. The fourth personality type is based on 3 complexities, each of which relate to thinking type, identity and resolution of communication. This type of personality is referred to as depersonalized personality type or lack of personality. In this personality type, the tendency is to avoid as much communication as possible as well as avoiding the resolution of the communication in order to prevent the compression or meaning related to the communicating in neither a positive nor negative way. In this sense, the expected tendency is to correlate the perceived outcome of communication, whether high or low energy, with the identity of the person prompting for communication rather than associated either with the individual experiencing depersonalized personality. In that sense, The expected outcome can be related to the process of personification or the association of an otherwise solvable relationship with an additional factor, in this case the additional factor being the association of the alternate party's identity with the outcome of the communication. This prevents the formation of relationships in a way that avoids trending towards or away from the overload event used to form and mark intimate personality. The formation of this personality in any sense is related to the standard theory of psychology's interpretation of intelligence in the form of an IQ interval. Please join me in the next segment as we explore the different types of IQ as defined by STEM psychology.